If you were to write a job title on Adnan Khashoggi's business card, what would it say? Arms dealer? Trader? Investor? These words are far too small to describe him. Perhaps fixer is a better word, but not an ordinary fixer. He was the fixer for kings, presidents, spies, and generals. He was the man governments turned to when they couldn't or wouldn't do something through official channels. From arming the Shah of Iran's massive military to designing a coup against the Islamic Republic, and then selling weapons to that very same Islamic Republic. This is the story of a man whose job was the impossible. This is the story of the greatest arms dealer and one of the wealthiest men of the 20th century. A man whose family name would decades later haunt the headlines in a far more tragic way. History is written in headlines. But the truth? That story is hidden in the profiles. Welcome to Profile. We unmask the figures who shaped and sometimes shook our world. If you seek the stories others miss, join our community of curious minds by hitting that subscribe button. Now, let's dive into today's enigma. The story of Adnan Khashoggi is the story of Saudi Arabia's transformation from a poor desert into a global oil empire. He was born in Mecca in 1935, but the keys to power were in his family's hands from the start. His father, Mohammed Khashoggi, was the personal physician and a trusted confidant to King Abdulaziz, the founder of Saudi Arabia. This connection opened the doors of the royal palace to young Adnan from childhood. Adnan was educated at Victoria College in Alexandria, Egypt, an institution for the Middle Eastern elite where students were physically punished for speaking any language other than English. He was later sent to the United States for university, but he quickly realized that the real opportunities lay not in the classroom, but in the corridors of power and commerce. Instead of earning a degree, he built a massive network of connections. His first major deal was a masterclass in his future business model. Using his father's palace connections, he brokered the sale of $3 million worth of American trucks to Egypt and pocketed a massive $150,000 commission. He never returned to university. Instead, in the 1960s and 70s, as the Saudi royals began flooding the world with oil money to buy weapons, Khashoggi became Mr. Fixer. He connected his old friends in Saudi Arabia to his new friends, the giant arms manufacturers of Britain and America. One of the most lucrative markets for Khashoggi was Iran. In the 1970s, Mohammad Reza Shah Pahlavi was using a river of oil dollars to build the world's fifth most powerful military. Adnan Khashoggi positioned himself as the main highway for this arms race. He became the exclusive broker and unofficial representative for the West's biggest defense firms, such as Lockheed Martin and Northrop. The head of Lockheed once described him as a one-man marketing department. Khashoggi didn't just sell weapons, he managed relationships. He established extremely close ties with high-ranking palace officials and military leaders, including General Hassan Tufanian, the powerful chief of Iran's military procurement. Khashoggi knew that to sell fighter jets and missiles, you needed more than technical catalogs. You needed generous commissions and lavish parties. As his reputation grew, so did his percentages, sometimes reaching 15% on deals worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It is said that a vast portion of his legendary fortune was built on these commissions from arms sales to Iran and Saudi Arabia. But his influence went beyond military contracts. Khashoggi invested in massive industrial and construction projects in Iran, partnering with the country's most powerful businessmen. He was no longer a simple broker. He was part of the very fabric of Iran's economic and political elite during its golden age. Behind the curtain, he was simultaneously arming the Shah's military and reaping massive profits from the era's economic boom. Adnan Khashoggi soon became the wealthiest man on earth. But unlike other billionaires, he didn't hide his riches. He turned his wealth into a powerful business tool. His strategy was simple: dazzle his clients with a legendary lifestyle until they reached a point where they simply couldn't say no to him. The primary symbol of this empire was his 86-meter superyacht, the Nabila. At the time, it was the largest and most luxurious private vessel in the world. It was a floating fortress, equipped with bulletproof glass, a surgical operating room, a cinema, and a master suite where the bathroom sinks were carved from solid gold. Donald Trump, who purchased the yacht from Khashoggi in 1987 for nearly $30 million, once remarked that the onyx in the bathrooms was sourced from the mountains of Italy and carved by the world's finest artisans. Khashoggi never missed an opportunity to flaunt his status. In 1983, he allowed the James Bond film Never Say Never Again to be filmed on his yacht. The vessel served as the floating headquarters for the film's villain, the Spectre operative Maximilian Largo. Khashoggi's biographer, Ronald Kessler, famously noted, "Adnan took his yachts as often as we take our cars." His daily life was beyond imagination. Khashoggi reportedly spent $250,000 every single day. He owned 12 luxury estates across the globe, from a massive 2-story penthouse in Manhattan to a 10,000-acre ranch in Kenya. A fleet of 3 private jets and 100 limousines were constantly at his beck and call. But his ultimate weapon was his parties. At these multi-million-dollar gatherings, he brought together Saudi princes, African dictators, shadowy brokers, and the biggest stars of Hollywood. According to his biographer, he could host the leaders of 5 different countries on his deck at the same time. These powerful men would sit in their suites in total privacy, using the yacht's 150 telephones and satellite communication systems to advance arms deals and global commodity trades. In one instance, Khashoggi moved from cabin to cabin, directing 16 different deals simultaneously. To close a deal, his clients received whatever they desired. As Kessler put it, he gave them everything: women, food, cash. He hosted a range of events on his ship, from highly formal ceremonies to nights of total debauchery. One of the women used in these events was Pamela Boards, who later revealed she was part of a large group used as sexual bait for his clients. In 1989, Vanity Fair magazine bluntly described Khashoggi as one of the greatest pimps in the world. Khashoggi himself referred to the women who entered his unofficial harem as women of pleasure moments. He once told one of them, "Under Saudi law, I am allowed 3 more legal wives and 11 women for my pleasure." To facilitate this, Khashoggi's personal suite on the yacht, which was separate from his wife's quarters, featured not only a 3-meter-wide bed, but also a secret corridor. This passage was used to quietly shuttle in and out the women he called the ladies of his harem. The peak of this display of power and wealth occurred in July 1985 during his 50th birthday celebration. He invited 400 of the world's most famous figures to a 5-day party at his 5,000-acre estate in Marbella, Spain. During this legendary event, his brother gifted him a live lion cub. The famous singer Shirley Bassey sang "Happy Birthday" to him, and he danced with Hollywood star Brooke Shields. A fleet of refrigerated trucks was stationed on the grounds just to keep the champagne cold, and his birthday cake was a work of art. A 1-meter-tall, completely edible recreation of the coronation of the French king Louis XIV. On the surface, Adnan Khashoggi's empire was a peerless display of extravagance. But behind the curtain, a powerful machine was at work. When it was time to sign a contract, his super yacht would sail into international waters to bypass restrictive government regulations. Commissions worth hundreds of millions of dollars were funneled into secret bank accounts in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. Khashoggi's power to attract influential figures was legendary. In the 1960s, he befriended Richard Nixon and financially supported both of his presidential campaigns. It is even said he once gifted Nixon's daughter a $60,000 bracelet. But his life was not just about trade and politics. His high-profile marriages and relationships with famous women kept him in the global headlines. His first wife, a 20-year-old British woman named Sandra Daly, converted to Islam and took the name Soraya. Their 13-year marriage ended in 1974. 5 years later, a judge ordered Khashoggi to pay her $875 million, at the time the largest divorce settlement in history. But the empire of Adnan Khashoggi was more than just a show of wealth. It was a powerful instrument of the Cold War. In the mid-1970s, after the Watergate scandal, the U.S. Congress had clipped the wings of the CIA, restricting its ability to conduct covert operations. The CIA needed an alternative, an unofficial network to continue the shadow war against Soviet influence. Adnan Khashoggi was one of the master architects of this solution. He helped establish the Safari Club, a secret intelligence alliance between the security services of France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the Shah's secret police, Savak. This was an unofficial NATO, fueled by Saudi money and Western weapons, leading anti-communist operations across Africa and the Middle East. The financial artery of this shadow empire was a mysterious and notorious bank, the Bank of Credit and Commerce International, or BCCI. This bank, founded with the money of Arab sheikhs, soon became the private bank for the CIA, dictators, and arms dealers. And Adnan Khashoggi was one of its key shareholders and clients. He was no longer just an arms dealer. He was an active player in the world of black ops. He was a man who could arm militaries, finance governments, and manage secret wars. And it was these capabilities that made him the central figure in one of the most daring and bizarre conspiracies in modern history. The winter of 1982. Reza Pahlavi, the young exiled crown prince of Iran, is in his palace in Rabat, Morocco, watching a program on the BBC. The guest is Yaakov Nimrodi, an Israeli businessman and former military attaché in Tehran. Nimrodi speaks with conviction about Iran's strategic importance and calls on the West to overthrow Ayatollah Khomeini and restore the monarchy. For the young prince, who had spent 3 bitter years in exile, this was a spark of hope. A few days later, he called Nimrodi and invited him to Morocco. Soon after, Nimrodi, accompanied by another influential Israeli businessman, Al Schwimmer, traveled to Rabat. There, in top-secret meetings with Reza Pahlavi and the Shah's exiled generals, the plan for a daring coup was forged. The generals confidently declared that to overthrow the Islamic Republic, they needed only one thing: money. Money to buy weapons and pay a mercenary army. Nimrodi knew only one man capable of providing such a fortune: his old friend, Adnan Khashoggi. Khashoggi entered the game with his signature smile. As the financier, he promised to secure the support of the Saudi royal family. Shortly after, an incredible meeting took place at Khashoggi's luxury residence in Kenya. Around one table sat the main actors of this international conspiracy: Ariel Sharon, the then defense minister of Israel, Dafar Nemeri, the president of Sudan, Yaakov Nimrodi, and Adnan Khashoggi himself. In that meeting, Khashoggi delivered the big news. King Fahd of Saudi Arabia had agreed to finance the operation with up to $1 billion. The plan was a complex, multinational operation. The money would flow from Saudi Arabia to Khashoggi's accounts. Israel would provide a full arsenal of weapons, from rifles and tanks to fighter jets. These weapons would be stockpiled in Sudan, and President Nimeri would allow the coup forces to train on Sudanese soil. Finally, the Egyptian government would handle the propaganda and media support. But at the same time, in the think tanks of the Mossad, the plan was viewed as a dangerous and foolish adventure. Analysts concluded that the Shah's exiled generals were completely out of touch with the realities of post-revolutionary Iran. They believed a small-scale attack against an army already hardened by war with Saddam Hussein had no chance of success. Yitzhak Shamir, the Israeli foreign minister, didn't trust the Arab partners, and the head of Mossad called the operation a bad idea for Israel. Ultimately, a senior Israeli spy was sent to Morocco to meet Reza Pahlavi and deliver a cold, final message. The Israelis who met with you do not represent us. They will only lead you into trouble. This message was a bucket of ice water poured over the $1 billion coup. The operation collapsed before it even began, betrayed by one of its own primary partners. The coup against the Islamic Republic had failed, but for a man like Adnan Khashoggi, every failure was simply a new opening for a deal. Now, it was time for a 180-degree turn. He began negotiating with the very same regime he had just tried to overthrow. In the 1980s, Iran was locked in a bloody, exhausting war with Iraq. The Iranian military, equipped with American weapons from the Shah's era, was desperate for spare parts and anti-tank TOW and anti-aircraft Hawk missiles. But because of international arms embargoes, there was no official way to buy them. At the same time, in Washington, the Ronald Reagan administration was struggling with the American hostage crisis in Lebanon. The hostages were being held by paramilitary groups close to Iran. The Reagan government, which had officially stated it would never negotiate with terrorists, was secretly searching for a backdoor solution. This is where two opposing needs met at a single point, and at the center of that point, once again, was the name Adnan Khashoggi. He was the only man capable of moving all the pieces on this complex chessboard. On one side, he was in contact with the White House and the CIA. On the other, he worked with Iranian arms brokers like Miniature Ghorbanifar. And most importantly, he utilized the same Israeli network that was supposed to arm the coup just years earlier, Yaakov Nimrodi and Al Schwimmer. The plan was a top-secret, tripartite deal. Israel, with a green light from the US, would supply the missiles Iran needed. Iran, in exchange, would use its influence to free the American hostages in Lebanon. And Adnan Khashoggi, using loans from the notorious BCCI Bank, acted as the financier and primary facilitator. Arms-laden planes flew from Israel to Iran, while payments were funneled through secret accounts to Khashoggi's banks in Switzerland. But in November 1986, the secret was blown wide open by a Lebanese magazine called Al-Shara. This ignited one of the biggest political scandals in modern American history, the Iran-Contra affair, or the McFarlane affair. The world was in shock. Adnan Khashoggi was no longer just a high-living billionaire. He was now known as the central figure in an international conspiracy. He was seen as a man with no principles, a man willing to deal with both sides of a war simultaneously. Years later, a French publication called Obsession claimed that one reason Khashoggi fought to maintain his marriage to Shahpari Zanganeh, the daughter of a famous Iranian singer, was her close economic ties to certain Iranian officials in the oil trade. While the extent of this remains unverified, it highlights the murky depth of his connections. The Iran-Contra scandal was the beginning of the end for the Khashoggi empire. With the exposure of the deal, he lost his most valuable asset, political immunity. No Western government could openly support him anymore. He transformed from a strategic asset into a burned-out operative. His clients grew suspicious, and they began to pull away. At the same time, the foundations of his financial empire began to shake. The collapse of oil prices in the mid-80s sharply reduced his massive commissions from arms sales. Yet, his $250,000 a day lifestyle continued. His mountain of debt was growing rapidly, and he became addicted to gambling in Western casinos. During this period, he lost vast sums of money at the tables, eventually reaching a point where he could no longer pay his debts, and he was summoned to court by his creditors. In 1989, the final blow landed. Khashoggi was arrested at the luxurious Schweizerhof Hotel in Switzerland at the request of the United States government. The charge? Helping the former Philippine dictator Ferdinand Marcos and his wife Imelda to hide and launder hundreds of millions of dollars stolen from the Filipino people. He spent 3 months in a Swiss jail, though his meals were reportedly delivered to his cell every day from that same luxury hotel. He was eventually extradited to the United States, but in a controversial trial in New York, both he and Imelda Marcos were acquitted of all charges. Nevertheless, his reputation was permanently stained. The fall of his empire was marked by powerful symbols. The notorious BCCI Bank, his financial lifeline, collapsed in one of the biggest banking scandals in history. And most famously, he was forced to sell his legendary superyacht, the Nabila. The buyer was a young, ambitious businessman named Donald Trump. It was a symbol of the end of one era and the beginning of another. The empire had crumbled. His personal bodyguard, whose nickname was Mr. Kill, was fired. His fleet of private jets was sold, and his luxury palaces were confiscated one by creditors. The king of deals was now a king without a throne. But in the midst of this collapse, his private life faced another scandal. In 1999, it was revealed that he was not the biological father of one of his daughters from his first wife, Soraya. The real father was Jonathan Aitken, a former British defense minister. The final years of Adnan Khashoggi's life were a pale shadow of his glittering past. He lived a quiet life in Monaco, still invited to lavish parties, but no longer at the center of the power game. He had become a relic of a bygone era. He finally passed away in 2017 while suffering from Parkinson's disease, surrounded by his family in London. His life was the ultimate symbol of the Cold War era, a time when private brokers and gray men held more power than entire governments. He was the ghost of that age, a man who built an empire at the intersection of oil, weapons, and politics. But the story of the name Khashoggi did not end with him. In a tragic and dark twist of fate, his nephew, the dissident journalist Jamal Khashoggi, met a horrific end in 2018. On the orders of Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Jamal was murdered and dismembered inside the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. This event showed that the name Khashoggi was still tied to the violent power games of the Middle East, but in a completely different and far more tragic way. Adnan Khashoggi was a brilliant strategist who built an empire on the crossing of oil, weapons, and secret diplomacy. But in the end, even he could not master the game of power and wealth forever. What is your judgment of Adnan Khashoggi? Was he a necessary evil for global diplomacy, or simply a merchant of death who profited from the world's chaos? Every story has two sides, and the truth usually lies somewhere in the shadows. We want to hear your perspective. Join the discussion in the comments below. If this profile gave you a new perspective, support our mission with a like and share. Thank you for being part of the Profile community. Until next time, stay curious.